More out on through fields of gray, chasing dreams that wouldn't stay. A heart so wild it couldn't kill, lost in the fight yet never healed. Morale, morale, don't fade away. Hold your ground, come what may. Through the storm, through the ache. Morale, morale, it's yours to take. The skies grew dark, the winds did howl, but more is fire, it burns so foul. Against the tide, against the fall, a spirit bold above it all. Morale, morale, don't fade away. Hold your ground, come what may. Through the storm, through the ache. Morale, morale, it's yours to take. Skies grew dark, the winds did howl, but more is fire, it burns so foul. Against the tide, against the fall, a spirit bold above it all. Morale, morale, don't fade away. Hold your ground, come what may. Through the storm, through the ache. Morale, morale, it's yours to take. When shadows whisper lies to you, remember light cuts through the blue. The strength you hold is in your hands. Morale, morale, make your stand. Morale, morale, don't fade away. Hold your ground, come what may. Through the storm, through the ache. Morale, morale, it's yours to take.
For students of the J.O.L.A.L.F, an introductory morality course offers a foundational exploration into the principles that guide human conduct, aiming to cultivate a robust ethical framework for both personal and professional life. This course begins by examining the core questions of ethics, delving into the nature of right and wrong, good and bad, and the various approaches to moral reasoning that have shaped philosophical thought throughout history. We will investigate prominent ethical theories such as consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics, understanding their strengths, limitations, and practical applications. Through a careful analysis of these frameworks, students will learn to identify the underlying assumptions of different moral arguments and develop a critical lens for evaluating ethical dilemmas. The curriculum will then shift to exploring the relationship between morality, law, and justice, considering how ethical principles inform legal systems and how legal frameworks, in turn, shape societal norms. We will engage with case studies that highlight the complexities of moral decision-making in diverse contexts, encouraging students to apply theoretical knowledge to real-world scenarios. Emphasis will be placed on developing empathetic reasoning, fostering an understanding of diverse perspectives, and recognizing the societal impact of individual and collective choices. Finally, the course will touch upon the evolving landscape of morality in the digital age, addressing contemporary ethical challenges posed by technology, globalization, and emerging social issues, thereby equipping J.O.L.A.L.F students with the tools to navigate a world increasingly characterized by complex moral considerations. If we adopt the principle of universality, if an action is right or wrong for others, it is right or wrong for us. Those who do not rise to the minimal moral level of applying to themselves the standards they apply to others, more stringent ones, in fact plainly cannot be taken seriously when they speak of appropriateness of response, or of right and wrong, good and evil. In fact, One of them, maybe the most elementary of moral principles, is that of universality, that is, if something's right for me, it's right for you, if it's wrong for you, it's wrong for me. Any moral code that is even worth looking at has that at its core somehow. Noam Chomsky. Morality can be understood as a system of principles and values that guide human behavior, distinguishing between what is considered right or wrong, good or bad. It encompasses the prevailing standards of conduct that enable individuals to live cooperatively within groups and societies, often requiring the sacrifice of short-term self-interest for the greater benefit. These moral codes can stem from cultural, religious, or philosophical beliefs, and while some universal moral rules appear across diverse societies, such as prohibitions against murder or theft, others can vary significantly based on geography, historical context, and evolving societal norms. Essentially, morality serves as a framework for judging intentions, decisions, and actions, providing a foundation for trust, cooperation, and the overall well-being of a community. Case study: the most well-known form of consequentialism is utilitarianism, which holds that the most ethical choice is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So, when a consequentialist looks at a decision, they're essentially asking, what will be the overall impact of this choice? Will it lead to more benefit than harm? A mora, plural mori or moras, often symbolized mu, is the smallest unit of timing in some spoken languages, equal to or shorter than a syllable, where phonetic length like vowel length is significant. For instance, in Japanese, the name Osaka has 3 syllables osaka but 4 mori osaka because the long o counts as 2 mori, while short vowels are monomori 1 mora. Consequently, a long vowel is bimoraic 2 mori. While rarer, some languages have trimoraic 3 mori syllables. This system of measuring syllable weight also applies to certain consonants in Japanese that can act as individual mori. Formation of mori. The general principles for assigning mori to speech segments are quite specific. A syllable's onset, the initial consonant or consonants, typically does not represent any mora. The syllable nucleus, usually a vowel, accounts for 1 mora if it's short and 2 mori if it's a long vowel or a diphthong. Consonants that function as syllable nuclei also contribute 1 mora if short and 2 if long, as seen in languages like Slovak. In some languages, such as Latin and Japanese, the coda, the consonant s at the end of a syllable, also represents 1 mora, while in others, like Irish, it does not. Furthermore, some languages, like Sanskrit with its pluti, can have trimoraic syllables where a long vowel or diphthong in the nucleus is followed by 1 or more consonants in the coda. Generally, syllables are categorized by their mora count. Monomoraic syllables are light, bimoraic are heavy, and trimoraic are super heavy. Historically, languages like Old English, and potentially present-day English, could even feature syllables with up to 4 mori. A prosodic stress system where heavier, moraically rich syllables receive stress is known as quantity sensitivity. Syllabus, Module 1, Foundations of Morality and Ethical Inquiry, Weeks 1-2. Defining morality, ethics, right, and wrong. Exploring the origins of morality: evolutionary, anthropological, philosophical. Understanding the principle of universality: if it's right for me, it's right for you. Activities, readings, journaling, discussion prompts on innate versus learned morality. Module 2, Major Ethical Theories, Weeks 3-6. Consequentialism and Utilitarianism, Focus, Outcomes and Greatest Good for Greatest Number. Key Thinkers, Bentham, Mill. Activities, readings, Applying to Whistleblower's Dilemma, Trolley Problem. Deontology, Duty-Based Ethics, Focus, Rules, Duties, Inherent Right Wrong. Key thinker, Kant categorical imperative. Activities, readings, applying to whistleblower's dilemma, reflection on rules versus outcomes. Virtue ethics, focus, character and cultivating virtues for flourishing. Key thinker, Aristotle. Activities, readings, applying to whistleblower's dilemma, personal virtue application. Module 3, Morality, Law, and Justice Weeks 7-8. Exploring the relationship and overlap between morality and law. Introducing theories of justice: distributive, procedural, retributive. Examining the ethics of civil disobedience. Activities, readings, case studies on law versus morality, debate on unjust laws. Module 4, Applied Ethics and Contemporary Challenges Weeks 9-10. Developing practical ethical decision-making frameworks. Emphasizing empathy and perspective-taking in moral reasoning. Addressing ethical challenges in the digital age: AI, data privacy, social media, globalization, corporate responsibility. Assessment, final exam. The most important human endeavor is the striving for morality in our actions. Our inner balance and even our very existence depend on it. Only morality in our actions can give beauty and dignity to life. Albert Einstein. The origin of morality is a profoundly complex and multifaceted question that has captivated philosophers, scientists, and theologians for millennia, drawing upon insights from evolutionary biology, anthropology, sociology, and philosophy itself. There is no single, universally accepted answer, but rather a rich tapestry of theories that illuminate different aspects of its emergence and development. Case study: one prominent perspective rooted in evolutionary biology suggests that morality is, at least in part, a product of natural selection. This view posits that prosocial behaviors, such as cooperation, empathy, and altruism, provided a significant survival advantage for early human groups. Individuals who were better able to cooperate, form strong social bonds, and differentiate between fair and unfair actions were more likely to survive and reproduce, passing on these inherent capacities for moral judgment. While humans are born with a predisposition for moral discernment and processuality, as evidenced by observations in infants and even some animal behaviors, the specific moral norms are shaped by cultural evolution. Charles Darwin himself considered the moral sense to be one of the most important differences between humans and other animals, arguing it stemmed from social instincts. This perspective emphasizes that the human capacity for ethics is a necessary attribute of our biological makeup, encompassing the ability to anticipate consequences, make value judgments, and choose between actions. From a sociological and anthropological standpoint, morality is seen as emerging and evolving within human societies to facilitate communal living and cooperation. As early human groups grew larger and more complex, particularly with the advent of agriculture, the need for shared rules of conduct became increasingly critical to maintain order, resolve disputes, and ensure the well-being of the group. Moral codes, initially unwritten and passed down through tradition, served as guidelines for acceptable behavior, fostering trust, and preventing chaos. These norms often included principles like honesty, respect, fairness, and loyalty, which are essential for social cohesion. The specific content of these moral codes could vary significantly across different cultures, influenced by religious beliefs, political systems, and historical events. For instance, early legal codes like the Code of Ornamu and the Code of Hammurabi illustrate formalized moral systems that addressed issues of crime, justice, and social hierarchy. Case study: philosophical inquiries into the origin of morality trace back to ancient civilizations. In Western thought, the foundational discussions began with ancient Greek philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in the 4th and 5th centuries BCE. Their inquiries moved beyond mythological explanations of right and wrong, seeking rational bases for ethical living. Socrates, through his method of questioning, aimed to establish objective moral truths, challenging the moral relativism of the sophists. Plato, in works like The Republic, explored justice not just in society but as a harmony within the individual soul, arguing that being just is ultimately in one's self-interest. Aristotle focused on eudaimonia, or human flourishing, as the purpose of life, achieved through the cultivation of virtues. These early philosophical explorations laid the groundwork for centuries of ethical debate, grappling with questions of duty, obligation, consequences, and the nature of the good life. Later philosophical traditions, from Hellenistic schools like Stoicism and Epicureanism to Christian ethics, the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason, Kant and sentiment, Hume, and modern metaethics, have continued to refine and challenge our understanding of morality's origins and its authority. The philosophy of morality, also known as moral philosophy or ethics, is a fundamental branch of philosophy that systematically investigates questions of right and wrong, good and bad, and how individuals ought to live. It goes beyond merely describing what people believe about morality. Descriptive ethics to explore the foundations, nature, and justification of moral judgments. Metaethics, as well as the principles that should guide our actions. Normative ethics, and how these principles apply to specific real-world issues. Applied ethics. Case study. At its core, moral philosophy delves into fundamental inquiries such as, what constitutes a good life? What are our duties and obligations to ourselves and others? Are there universal moral truths, or is morality purely relative to individuals or cultures? How do we acquire moral knowledge, and how do our moral beliefs influence our actions? Unlike legal systems which are enforced externally, or social customs which are merely descriptive, ethics seeks a rational and justifiable basis for moral behavior, aiming to provide a coherent framework for moral decision-making. Historically, this field has been shaped by diverse thinkers who offered varying approaches, from ancient Greek philosophers who sought virtue and human flourishing, to Enlightenment thinkers who emphasized reason and duty, to modern philosophers who grapple with the subjective and objective nature of moral claims. Ultimately, the philosophy of morality is a continuous human endeavor to understand the most profound questions of how we should conduct ourselves in the world. While morality typically falls within the domain of philosophy and ethics, its intersection with linguistics explores how language both reflects and shapes our moral understanding and behavior. This field of inquiry delves into several fascinating areas. One key aspect is the moral dimension of language use itself. This involves examining the ethical implications of how we choose and deploy words in communication. It considers concepts like linguistic politeness, which involves selecting respectful vocabulary and appropriate sentence structures, and conversational politeness, which pertains to considering the social status of the interlocutor. Beyond mere etiquette, this extends to the ethics of discourse, encompassing honesty, accuracy, and the avoidance of manipulative or harmful language. For instance, the use of sexist, racist, or otherwise biased language can perpetuate inaccuracies and prejudice, making its avoidance an ethical imperative for responsible communication. The impact of euphemisms, loaded terms, and even the subtle nuances of syntax can carry moral weight, influencing perceptions and shaping reality. Furthermore, linguists and cognitive scientists investigate how language affects moral judgment and decision-making. Studies have explored whether making moral judgments in a foreign language leads to more utilitarian or less emotional responses compared to judging in one's native tongue. This foreign language effect suggests that the emotional distance created by processing a dilemma in a non-native language might reduce the influence of knee-jerk emotional reactions, allowing for more rational, consequence-based considerations. This area also touches upon the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which posits that language influences thought, and how the vocabulary and grammatical structures of a language might subtly predispose speakers to certain moral perspectives or ways of framing ethical issues. Another significant area is the morality embedded within language itself. This refers to the historical and cultural values that are fossilized within words, phrases, and linguistic conventions. Dictionaries and etymology, for example, can reveal shifts in societal moral attitudes over time, as words acquire positive or negative connotations. The very act of categorizing and naming phenomena through language can reflect and reinforce prevailing moral norms and beliefs. This perspective suggests that language acts as a moral barometer of a society, recording both its virtues and its failings. This is also evident in how communities define concepts like justice, dignity, or goodness through their linguistic expressions, even if the precise understanding of these terms might vary. Finally, the ethics of linguistic research and practice is a critical consideration for linguists. This involves ensuring responsible conduct when studying diverse languages and communities, particularly regarding issues of informed consent, protecting research subjects, and respecting cultural and linguistic diversity. It also extends to the ethical implications of language identification, e.g., deciding whether a variety is a language or a dialect, which can have significant social and political consequences, and the responsibility of linguists in language revitalization efforts or in addressing language-based discrimination. This professional ethics ensures that linguistic inquiry is conducted with integrity and benefits the communities it studies. Case study: this case study on Medicure Pharmaceuticals highlights how language choices in crisis communication deeply intertwine with moral responsibility and public perception. When facing a product recall due to severe side effects, the company's use of passive voice, it has been determined, nominalization's unfortunate incident, hedging may have occurred, and technical jargon aims to deflect direct accountability and obscure the human impact of their actions. This linguistic strategy subtly sanitizes the situation, prioritizing damage control over clear admission of fault. In contrast, affected individuals and their advocates employ active voice, direct blame, and emotionally charged terms, explicitly framing the issue in terms of culpability, suffering, and the demand for justice. This stark difference in language underscores how words are not neutral. They are powerful tools that can either clarify or obfuscate moral agency, ultimately shaping public judgment of a company's ethical conduct and its perceived sincerity in addressing harm. Languages utilizing Mori. Several languages demonstrate the importance of Mori in their phonological systems. In ancient Greek, for accentuation purposes, short vowels comprise one mora, while long vowels and diphthongs count as two. This means a long eeta can be thought of as two short e's. The pitch accent in ancient Greek falls on a single mora within a word, with the acute accent indicating high pitch on the last mora of a long vowel or the only mora of a short vowel, and the circumflex indicating high pitch on the first mora of a long vowel. Gilbertus, an Austronesian language, stands out as a trimoraic language where its typical metrical foot contains 3 mori, forming units of stress. This ternary constraint on prosodic word size is considered cross-linguistically rare. In Hawaiian, both syllables and mori are crucial. Stress typically falls on the penultimate mora, although in longer words with multiple stresses, only the final one is predictable. Interestingly, while diphthongs like oi are bimoraic syllables, stress can only fall on the first mora, distinguishing them from other two-syllable vowel sequences like io. Japanese is perhaps the most well-known example of a language that primarily uses mori, or haku, or mora, rather than syllables as the foundation of its sound system. The kana writing system hiragana and katakana distinctly illustrates this moraic structure. For instance, the word mora is written with 3 kana symbols, each representing a mora, even though it's a 2-syllable word. This is why haiku follow a 5-7-5 mora pattern, not a syllable pattern. The Japanese syllable final n and the first part of a geminate consonant also function as individual mori. This means words like Nihon 3 mori and Nippon 4 mori are written with a corresponding number of kana characters versus. The small tsu, known as sokyuan, signifies a 1 mora period of silence. Similarly, place names like Tokyo to Ukyoyu, Osaka Oosaka, and Nagasaki Nagasaki, all contain 4 mori, despite varying syllable counts. Japanese also features special mori which, while counting as 1 mora, cannot be pronounced independently. These include the nasal sound, the geminate consonant, the long sound, or a vowel extending the previous sound, and the diphthong, the second vowel in a sequence. A notable characteristic for learners is that the pitch drop in a Japanese word downstep generally cannot occur after any of these special mori. In Luganda, a short vowel is 1 mora, while a long vowel is 2. A simple consonant has no mori, but a doubled or prenasalized consonant contributes 1. No syllable in Luganda can exceed 3 mori, and its tone system is also mora-based. Old English similarly assigned mori, short diphthongs and monophthongs were monomore, while long ones were bimoraic. Consonants at the end of a syllable each added 1 mora, and geminate consonants contributed a mora to the preceding syllable. It is hypothesized that Old English, like potentially modern English, limited syllables to 4 mori, with sound loss occurring if this limit was exceeded. During the Old English period, all content words and stressed monosyllables had to be at least 2 mori long. Finally, in Sanskrit, the mora is referred to as the matra. A short vowel like a has 1 matra, a long vowel a has 2, and diphthongs like ai also have 2. Sanskrit also recognizes pluta trimoraic and dirgha pluta quadrimoraic. Sanskrit prosody and metrics historically emphasize moraic weight, categorizing feet as lagu, light, or dirgha guru, heavy based on the mori within each word. For instance, the word cart agent is considered to have a dirgha guru foot followed by a lagu foot because the joined consonants rt make the otherwise light ka syllable heavy. The exploration of morality in linguistics underscores that language is far more than a neutral vehicle for communication, it is an active force in shaping our moral landscape. The way we choose our words, frame our arguments, and even the grammatical structures we employ profoundly influences how moral issues are perceived, understood, and acted upon. From the subtle power of euphemisms to soften harsh realities, to the deliberate use of loaded terms to assign blame or elicit sympathy, linguistic choices carry significant ethical weight. Recognizing this dynamic interplay means acknowledging the moral responsibility inherent in every utterance and text, urging us to be mindful of how our language reflects and molds not just our individual ethics, but the collective moral fabric of society. Case study: the dehumanizing rhetoric and its moral consequences. Scenario: in a polarized nation, a prominent political commentator, widely followed on social media and broadcast, begins consistently referring to a specific immigrant group as an invasion and its members as illegals who are draining resources and diluting national identity. They often use metaphors depicting the group as a flood or swarm, implying a threat to the existing social order and likening individuals to an undifferentiated, harmful mass. The commentator also frequently questions the humanity and moral worth of individuals within this group, often suggesting they lack work ethic or respect for local laws. Over time, this rhetoric becomes pervasive in certain media outlets and political discourse. Concurrently, incidents of harassment and discrimination against members of this immigrant group increase significantly, alongside calls for more stringent, often punitive, policies targeting them. Businesses that employ individuals from this group face boycotts, and there are reports of individuals from the immigrant community being verbally assaulted with the very terms popularized by the commentator. The language, initially just words, appears to have directly fostered an environment where discriminatory actions are normalized and even justified by a segment of the population. The philosophical debate between moral realism and moral anti-realism lies at the heart of metaethics, a branch of moral philosophy that explores the nature and foundations of moral judgments. This central dispute concerns whether moral properties like rightness, wrongness, goodness, and badness exist objectively in the world, independent of human minds and conventions, or if they are purely subjective constructions. Moral realism asserts that there are objective moral facts, truths, or properties that exist independently of our beliefs, feelings, or cultural practices. From a realist perspective, a statement like torture is wrong is considered true in the same way that the earth revolves around the sun is true. Its truth value does not depend on whether any individual or society believes it. Moral realists argue that when we make moral judgments, we are attempting to describe features of the world, and these judgments can therefore be objectively true or false. Different forms of moral realism exist, including moral naturalism. This view holds that moral properties are identical to, or reducible to, certain natural properties, perhaps psychological, sociological, or biological ones. For example, some naturalists might argue that good is whatever maximizes well-being, a natural property that can be empirically studied. Moral non-naturalism or ethical intuitionism, this position, often associated with G.E. Moore, maintains that moral properties are objective but are not reducible to natural properties. Instead, they are distinct, non-natural properties that we can grasp through intuition or a special kind of moral perception. Non-naturalists would argue that good is a simple, unanalyzable property, just as yellow is. The main arguments for moral realism often stem from the intuitive sense that some moral statements feel objectively true, the way we engage in moral disagreement, which often seems to be about discovering a truth, not just expressing preferences, and the desire for moral authority that goes beyond mere human opinion. Moral realists find it difficult to account for widespread moral progress or reform if there are no objective moral standards against which to measure improvement. On the other side, moral anti-realism denies the existence of objective moral facts or properties. Anti-realists contend that moral judgments are not descriptions of an independent moral reality but are, in some way, expressions or creations of human attitudes, emotions, or social conventions. For anti-realists, a statement like torture is wrong might express a feeling of disapproval, a command, or a cultural norm, but it is not a claim about an objective moral feature of torture itself. Key forms of moral anti-realism include emotivism, popularized by A.J.O.L.A.L.F and Charles L. Stevenson. Emotivism claims that moral judgments are merely expressions of emotion. So, torture is wrong is equivalent to saying boo. Torture, or expressing disapproval of torture. It's not a statement that can be true or false. Prescriptivism, advocated by R.M. Hare, prescriptivism suggests that moral judgments are universalizable prescriptions or commands. Torture is wrong means something like do not torture, and I will it to be a universal rule for everyone. Error theory, proponents like J.L.A.L.F Mackey argue that moral judgments do purport to describe objective moral facts, but because no such facts exist, all positive moral claims are systematically false or in error. When we say torture is wrong, we're making a claim about an objective wrongness that isn't actually there. Moral relativism, often a form of anti-realism, while it can take objective forms, e.g. objective truth about relative moral principles, it is most commonly understood as the view that moral truths are relative to individual subjectivism or culture's cultural relativism. For example, if a culture believes polygamy is moral, then it is moral for that culture, and there's no objective, culture-independent standard to say otherwise. Arguments for moral anti-realism often point to the apparent diversity of moral views across cultures and history. The argument from disagreement, the difficulty of empirically verifying moral facts, and the idea that moral properties, if they existed, would be queer or unlike anything else we know in the universe. The debate between these two metaethical positions profoundly impacts how we understand the nature of morality, the possibility of moral progress, and the authority of our ethical convictions. The preceding discussions delved into the intricacies of moral philosophy, examining the fundamental nature of right and wrong, and subsequently, how language itself interacts with and shapes our moral perceptions. This exploration naturally leads to a deeper metaethical question: do moral truths exist objectively, independent of human minds and cultures, or are they purely subjective creations? This is the core contention between moral realism and moral anti-realism. Moral realism posits that there are objective moral facts and properties in the world, much like scientific facts. When we say murder is wrong, a moral realist believes the statement is true regardless of whether any individual or society believes it, implying that moral judgments can be objectively true or false. Variants of this view include moral naturalism, which attempts to ground moral properties in observable natural features like well-being, and moral non-naturalism, which suggests moral properties are objective but non-reducible to natural ones, often grasped through intuition. Arguments supporting realism often stem from the intuitive feeling that some moral claims are universally true, the way moral disagreements feel like genuine debates about truth, and the need for objective standards to account for moral progress. Understanding the principle of universality means grappling with the foundational moral idea that if a particular action or judgment is deemed right for one individual or situation, it must similarly apply to all others in relevantly similar circumstances, including oneself. Conversely, if it's wrong for someone else, it's also wrong for us, ensuring consistency and impartiality in our ethical framework. This principle encourages deep reflection on whether our moral rules are truly universalizable, fostering discussions on the origins of morality, whether such principles are innate or learned through societal interaction, and prompting personal examination through activities like reflective journaling and engaging with diverse philosophical texts. Case study: the borrowed ideas and the plagiarism outcry. Scenario: Mark is a prominent opinion columnist known for his passionate articles condemning intellectual dishonesty, particularly plagiarism, in academia and journalism. His columns frequently use strong language, asserting that plagiarism is a moral stain, a theft of originality, and that those who commit it lack fundamental integrity and deserve severe penalties. He has built a significant reputation on his consistent stance against any form of academic or professional deceit. However, an anonymous researcher uncovers compelling evidence that several paragraphs and key arguments in Mark's own early published works, including his acclaimed book on journalistic ethics, were directly lifted, sometimes word for word, from obscure academic papers and historical texts without proper attribution. When confronted with this evidence, Mark initially denies it, then attempts to justify it by claiming these were common knowledge or minor oversights from early in his career, arguing that his later work and current moral stance should be judged independently. He insists that while others who plagiarize are morally bankrupt, his past actions don't negate his present authority to condemn them. Consequentialism and utilitarianism. Consequentialism is an ethical theory that posits the morality of an action is determined solely by its outcomes or consequences. Point 1. The most prominent form of consequentialism is utilitarianism, which specifically argues that the most ethical choice is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Point 2. This framework, championed by key thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, focuses on maximizing overall happiness, well-being, or utility. Point 3. When applying this theory, one would assess potential actions by weighing their foreseeable positive and negative consequences to identify the option that yields the best net result for all affected parties. Practical applications of this approach involve analyzing dilemmas like the whistleblower's dilemma by calculating which action would lead to the most beneficial overall outcome, or engaging with classic thought experiments such as the trolley problem to explore the implications of prioritizing collective welfare. Point 4. Case study for consequentialism and utilitarianism, the lifeboat dilemma. Scenario: you are the captain of a small lifeboat, designed for 10 people, following a shipwreck in the middle of a vast, frigid ocean. You currently have 12 survivors on board, and a severe storm is rapidly approaching. The lifeboat is dangerously overloaded, and you can see that it will inevitably capsize in the rough seas, condemning all 12 occupants to certain death from hypothermia or drowning within the next hour. You have no hope of immediate rescue. You realize that if you reduce the number of people to exactly 10, the lifeboat will be stable enough to weather the storm, and the 10 remaining survivors have a strong chance of being rescued when the storm passes. The 12 people on board include a brilliant young cancer researcher who is close to a cure, an elderly, retired school teacher, a pregnant woman, a single father of 3 young children who are waiting for him at home, 8 other individuals, each with varying degrees of social utility, e.g. a plumber, an artist, a lawyer, an unemployed person. Applying consequentialism utilitarianism, from a utilitarian perspective, the primary goal is to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number. Point 1. This means calculating which choice will result in the best overall outcome, often measured by maximizing lives saved and minimizing suffering. Point 2. In this dire scenario, a strict utilitarian might argue that sacrificing 2 individuals to save 10 is the morally necessary action, as it leads to a net gain of 8 lives that would otherwise be lost. The difficulty lies in who to sacrifice, as utilitarianism might also consider the quality of life or potential future contributions, e.g. the cancer researcher, the single father when assessing greatest good, though this can quickly become complex and morally fraught. The decision focuses purely on the net consequences. Questions for analysis: what would a strict utilitarian determine is the right action in this scenario, and why? How would a utilitarian decide which 2 people to remove from the lifeboat to maximize overall good? What specific criteria might they use, and what are the ethical challenges of applying such criteria? What are the potential criticisms of using a purely utilitarian approach in such a life or death situation? Does it adequately account for the value of individual lives, regardless of their utility? Deontology, duty-based ethics. In contrast to consequentialism, deontology, or duty-based ethics, asserts that the morality of an action is determined by its adherence to rules and duties, irrespective of its consequences. Point 5. This approach emphasizes that certain actions are inherently right or wrong because they align with a universal moral law or principle, rather than because of the outcomes they produce. Point 6. The most influential figure in deontology is Immanuel Kant, who articulated the categorical imperative, a framework for identifying universal moral duties. Point 7. According to Kant, a moral action is one that could be universalized without contradiction and that treats humanity as an end in itself, never merely as a means. When approaching a dilemma like the whistleblower's dilemma through a deontological lens, the focus would be on identifying Sarah's inherent duties and whether her actions uphold universal moral principles, rather than on predicting the best outcome. Point 8. This often involves reflecting on whether a particular rule, if universally applied, would lead to a just and rational world. Case study for deontology, duty-based ethics, the whistleblower's promise. Scenario: Dr. Anya Sharma is a leading epidemiologist working for a prestigious private research institution. She is bound by a strict confidentiality agreement, reinforced by a personal promise to her mentor, Dr. Ben Carter, who is now the CEO of the institution, never to reveal sensitive internal research data to outsiders without explicit company approval. Anya discovers that a promising new drug developed by her institution, intended to treat a widespread, debilitating disease, has shown statistically significant, albeit rare, long-term side effects during clinical trials that were not properly reported in the public summary. These side effects, which include severe cardiac complications, could be life-threatening for a small percentage of users. The company is on the verge of seeking fast-track approval, and Dr. Carter is pushing for rapid commercialization, emphasizing the immense suffering the drug could alleviate if approved quickly. Anya believes she has a moral duty to warn the public and regulatory bodies about the unreported side effects, potentially saving lives but breaking her confidentiality agreement and her personal promise to her mentor, which could destroy her career and Dr. Carter's reputation. Applying deontology, a deontological approach would center on Dr. Sharma's duties and whether specific actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of their consequences. Point 3 Kantian deontology, for example, would ask if her actions could be universalized without contradiction. Is there a universal moral rule that dictates one must always uphold promises, even when lives are at stake, or is there a higher duty to truth and public safety? A deontologist might argue that lying or breaking a promise is inherently wrong because it undermines the very foundation of trust and rational action, even if doing so might lead to a better outcome. Conversely, they might argue that a rational being has a duty to protect innocent life, and that duty overrides the duty to uphold a promise made under specific now conflicting circumstances. The focus is on the moral principles governing her choices, not merely the outcome. Questions for analysis: what duties does Dr. Sharma have in this situation? From a deontological perspective, to her promise to the public, to her profession, how would Kant's categorical imperative guide Dr. Sharma's decision? Could a rule like always break confidentiality to prevent harm be universalized without contradiction, or always keep promises, even if harm results? What are the strengths and weaknesses of using a purely deontological approach here, especially when the consequences of strict adherence to duty could be severe? Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics shifts the focus from judging individual actions to evaluating the character of the moral agent itself. Point 9 Instead of asking what should I do, it primarily asks, what kind of person should I be? This framework emphasizes the cultivation of virtues such as honesty, courage, compassion, and justice as the path to achieving eudaimonia, or human flourishing. Point 10 For Aristotle, the foundational thinker of virtue ethics, living a good life involves developing a virtuous character through practice and habit, finding the golden mean between extremes. Point 11 When considering the whistleblower's dilemma from a virtue ethics perspective, the analysis would center on what virtues Sarah would embody through her decision-making process. Point 12 The goal is to act in a way that demonstrates admirable character traits, fostering personal integrity and contributing to a life of well-being, rather than simply adhering to rules or calculating consequences. This approach also encourages personal application, prompting individuals to identify and strive to cultivate specific virtues in their own lives. Case study for virtue ethics: the ambitious architect and the client's budget. Scenario: Liam is a highly talented, ambitious architect who has just landed his dream project, designing a new eco-friendly community center for a rapidly growing city. This project could define his career, establish his firm as a leader in sustainable design, and bring him significant personal recognition. During the design phase, Liam discovers a new, innovative construction material that would significantly enhance the building's energy efficiency and aesthetic appeal, making it truly groundbreaking. However, using this material would push the project about 15% over the agreed-upon budget. The client, the city council, has a strict public budget and has made it clear that cost overruns are unacceptable and politically damaging. Liam knows he could subtly cut corners on less visible aspects of the building's interior or use slightly inferior, but still compliant, standard materials elsewhere to offset the cost of the innovative material, thereby staying within budget. This would likely go unnoticed by the council and the public, and the building would still appear to meet its eco-friendly goals superficially. However, it would compromise the deeper commitment to sustainability and quality that he, as an architect, values. Applying virtue ethics, a virtue ethics approach would focus on what kind of architect, and more broadly, what kind of person, Liam ought to be. It wouldn't primarily ask what action will produce the best outcome, consequentialism, or what rules must I follow, deontology. Instead, it would consider which virtues are relevant to the situation and how a truly virtuous architect would act. Virtues like honesty, integrity, professional excellence, courage, and responsibility to the public would be central. The decision would be about cultivating these virtues and acting in a way that reflects an excellent character, even if it means facing a difficult conversation or sacrificing some personal ambition. Questions for analysis: what virtues are most relevant to Liam's dilemma, e.g. integrity, honesty, courage, excellence, responsibility? How would a virtuous architect, striving for eudaimonia flourishing, approach this situation? What would be the golden mean between simply prioritizing budget and excessively overspending? How might Liam's decision contribute to or detract from his character development as a professional and as a person? What are the limitations of virtue ethics in this scenario? Does it provide clear enough guidance on what specific action to take? Exploring the relationship and overlap between morality and law. The relationship between morality and law is one of the most enduring and complex subjects in ethical and legal philosophy. While often intertwined, they are distinct concepts. Morality refers to a system of principles and values that guide human conduct, rooted in concepts of right, wrong, good, and bad, often stemming from personal beliefs, cultural norms, or philosophical reasoning. Point 1. Law, conversely, is a system of rules created and enforced by governmental or social institutions to regulate behavior, backed by state power and sanctions. Point 2. The overlap is significant. Many laws are directly derived from widely accepted moral principles, e.g., laws against murder or theft reflect moral prohibitions against harming others or taking their property. Laws aim to promote societal order, justice, and the common good, objectives often shared by moral systems. Point 3. However, morality often extends beyond the reach of law, addressing matters of conscience, virtue, and intention that are difficult or impossible to legislate. Furthermore, laws can exist that are morally questionable or even unjust, leading to ethical dilemmas about obedience. Point 4. The ongoing dynamic between these two domains shapes public policy, legal reform, and individual conscience, prompting continuous debate on whether a morally flawed law retains its binding authority. Introducing theories of justice. Central to understanding the intersection of morality and law is the concept of justice, which seeks to establish what is fair, equitable, and right in the distribution of benefits and burdens within society. Moral philosophy offers several key theories of justice. Distributive justice. Distributive justice concerns the fair allocation of resources, opportunities, and benefits within a society. 5. It asks how goods like wealth, income, education, healthcare, and burdens like taxes, military service should be distributed among members of a community. Point 6. Different theories propose varying criteria for this distribution. Egalitarianism suggests that resources should be distributed equally. Point 7. Meritocracy argues that distribution should be based on effort, talent, or contribution. Needs-based justice posits that resources should be distributed according to individual needs. John Rawls's theory of justice as fairness proposes that a just distribution would be one chosen by rational individuals behind a veil of ignorance, ensuring fairness by removing bias towards one's own position in society. typically leading to principles that benefit the least advantaged. Point 8. Case study for distributive justice, the healthcare resource allocation dilemma. Scenario: a national healthcare system in a developed country faces a severe and sudden budget crisis. It must decide how to allocate its limited resources for a new, highly effective, but extremely expensive drug for a rare chronic disease. This drug, if given to all who need it, would bankrupt the system. The government has identified three options for distributing the drug: universal access, provide the drug to everyone diagnosed, but this means significant cuts to preventative care programs, e.g. childhood vaccinations, diabetes screening that benefit a much larger population. Age-based priority, prioritize younger patients who are expected to live longer and contribute more years to society, effectively denying it to older patients. Lottery system, distribute the drug via a random lottery among all eligible patients, ensuring equal chance but not prioritizing based on need, potential, or contribution. Analysis through distributive justice, an egalitarian approach might struggle, as truly equal access to everything is impossible under budget constraints, forcing a choice between equal access to the drug or equal preventative care. A meritocratic view might favor those deemed more productive members of society, which is ethically fraught. A needs-based approach would argue for providing the drug to all who need it, but the budget constraint makes this impossible, forcing a prioritization of needs. A Rawlsian perspective might lean towards maximizing the benefits for the least advantaged, e.g. ensuring basic preventative care for all, even if it means some do not get the expensive drug, or ensuring a fair process like a lottery, which doesn't discriminate based on social factors. Point 9. Questions for analysis: which theory of distributive justice does each of the three allocation options, universal access, age-based priority, lottery, most align with? What are the moral justifications and ethical challenges of each option from a distributive justice perspective? If you were a policymaker, what criteria would you prioritize, and which theory of distributive justice would guide your decision? Procedural justice. Procedural justice focuses on the fairness of the processes and rules used to make decisions, particularly in legal and administrative contexts. Tenet asserts that if the procedures for making decisions are fair, then the outcomes derived from those procedures are more likely to be accepted as just, regardless of whether every individual is satisfied with the outcome. Key elements of procedural justice include transparency, impartiality, consistency in applying rules, opportunities for representation, and the right to appeal. Case study for procedural justice, the university admissions process. Scenario: elite university is renowned for its highly competitive admission process, receiving tens of thousands of applications annually for a limited number of spots. Recently, a public controversy erupted. A few rejected applicants and their families claimed that the admissions committee was opaque, lacked clear, published criteria beyond academic scores, and that decisions seemed arbitrary, with some applicants with lower test scores and grades being admitted over others with stronger academic profiles. There are also rumors of favoritism towards alumni legacies or large donors. Elite University maintains that its process is holistic and involves a complex evaluation of many factors, but they refuse to release specific scoring rubrics or individual decision rationales, citing confidentiality. Analysis through procedural justice. A concern for procedural justice would immediately question the lack of transparency in elite universities' admissions process. The rumors of favoritism alumni, donors directly challenge the principle of impartiality. The claim of arbitrary decisions suggests a lack of consistency in applying rules, even if the rules are holistic. From a procedural justice standpoint, the process should be clear, consistent, and seen as fair, even if not everyone gets admitted. The lack of transparency itself can be seen as an injustice, as applicants cannot understand why a decision was made. Questions for analysis: what elements of elite universities' admissions process might violate principles of procedural justice? How would greater transparency, consistency, and impartiality in the process enhance its perceived fairness? Even for rejected applicants, are there limits to transparency in processes like university admissions, and how might these limits be ethically justified from a procedural justice perspective? Retributive justice. Retributive justice is concerned with the fair and appropriate punishment of those who commit wrongdoing. 11. It asserts that punishment should be proportionate to the crime committed, based on the idea that wrongdoers deserve to suffer for their actions. The principle of lex talionis, or an eye for an eye, though not necessarily literally applied in modern contexts. 12. It contrasts with utilitarian approaches to punishment which focus on deterrence or rehabilitation by emphasizing the idea of just deserts and the restoration of moral balance. Case study for retributive justice: the juvenile offender and the victim's family. Scenario: a 16-year-old, Alex, commits a severe act of vandalism that results in significant property damage and emotional distress for an elderly couple, the Millers, whose home was targeted. Alex has no prior criminal record, but his actions caused the Millers considerable financial burden and left them feeling unsafe and violated. The legal system must decide on an appropriate punishment for Alex. The community is divided. Some argue for a strict, punitive sentence to ensure justice for the Millers and to deter future acts of vandalism. Others advocate for a rehabilitative approach, emphasizing Alex's youth, lack of prior offenses, and the potential for restorative justice programs, e.g. community service, counseling, direct apology, and restitution to the Millers. Analysis through retributive justice. A strict retributive justice perspective would focus on ensuring Alex's punishment fits the crime. 13. The severity of the damage and the emotional distress caused to the Millers would dictate the level of punishment. The aim is to ensure that Alex receives his just deserts, not primarily to rehabilitate him or deter others, but because he deserves the punishment for the wrong he committed. The debate here is often about the proportion of the punishment to the harm, and whether factors like age or potential for rehabilitation should mitigate the deserving punishment. While not strictly an eye for an eye, it demands that the suffering of the victim be mirrored in the punishment of the offender to some extent. Questions for analysis. From a purely retributive justice perspective, what factors would be most important in determining Alex's punishment, and what kind of sentence might be considered just? How does the concept of just deserts play out in this scenario, considering the victim's suffering and the offender's actions? What are the ethical challenges of a purely retributive approach, particularly when dealing with juvenile offenders or cases where rehabilitation seems possible? Examining the ethics of civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is a morally driven act of publicly, nonviolently, and conscientiously breaking a law or laws, with the aim of drawing attention to what is perceived as an unjust law or policy, and thereby bringing about a change in that law or policy. 14. It is a powerful tool at the intersection of morality and law, where individuals or groups prioritize a higher moral principle over legal compliance. For acts of civil disobedience to be considered ethically justifiable, they typically require certain conditions. The law being protested must be genuinely unjust, often violating fundamental human rights or moral principles. All legal and conventional avenues for change must have been exhausted. The act must be nonviolent, and the disobedience must accept the legal consequences of their actions to demonstrate their respect for the overall legal system while protesting a specific injustice. Within it. 15. Prominent historical figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. are often cited as exemplars of ethically justified civil disobedience. Case study for civil disobedience: the pipeline protest. Scenario: a large energy corporation receives government approval to construct a new oil pipeline through a region of significant ecological sensitivity and cultural importance to an indigenous community. Scientists present evidence that the pipeline poses a substantial risk of environmental damage, e.g. spills, habitat destruction, and could contaminate the indigenous community's primary water source. 16 The indigenous community, along with environmental activists, argue that the approval process was flawed, their concerns were ignored, and the pipeline constitutes a moral violation of their ancestral land rights and environmental stewardship. They have exhausted all legal avenues: court appeals, public hearings, lobbying efforts to stop the project. In response, a coalition of indigenous elders and environmental activists decide to engage in an act of civil disobedience. They nonviolently occupy a section of the pipeline construction site, forming human blockades to prevent machinery from operating. They explicitly state their intent to break laws related to trespassing and obstruction, are prepared to be arrested, and use their arrests to draw national and international attention to the perceived injustice of the pipeline's construction and the moral imperative to protect the environment and indigenous rights. Analysis of civil disobedience. This case presents a classic example of civil disobedience. The protesters believe the law allowing the pipeline is unjust, not merely inconvenient, because it infringes upon what they perceive as higher moral principles: environmental protection, indigenous land rights, and the right to clean water. They have exhausted legal remedies and are acting nonviolently and publicly, accepting the legal consequences: arrests to highlight the moral issue. The ethical justification for their actions rests on the premise that the law in question is fundamentally immoral or violates a higher moral duty, making non-compliance a moral imperative. 17. Questions for analysis. Based on the criteria for ethically justified civil disobedience, does the pipeline protest meet these conditions? Why or why not? What moral principles are the protesters prioritizing over legal compliance in this scenario? What are the potential positive and negative consequences of such an act of civil disobedience, both for the protesters and for the wider society? And the issue itself from an ethical standpoint: when is it morally permissible, or even obligatory, for individuals or groups to engage in civil disobedience against a perceived unjust law? How might those who oppose the protest, e.g. the government, the energy corporation, linguistically frame the protesters' actions to undermine their moral claims? Here are long case studies designed for Module 4, Applied Ethics and Contemporary Challenges, emphasizing practical ethical decision-making, empathy, perspective-taking, and contemporary issues. Case Study 1, Algorithmic Bias in Predictive Policing. Scenario: the city of Metropolis has implemented a new AI-powered predictive policing system, Sentinel Guard, developed by a leading tech firm, Cognitech Solutions. Sentinel Guard uses vast data sets including historical crime records, socioeconomic indicators, demographic data, and even social media activity to predict where and when crimes are most likely to occur. The goal is to optimize police patrols and reduce crime rates, leading to a safer city. The system generates hotspot maps, directing police resources to specific neighborhoods at final exam for J.O.L.A.L.F Introductory Morality Course. Course title: Introduction to Morality. Duration: 2 hours. Format: combination of multiple choice, short answer, and essay questions. Objective: to evaluate students' comprehension of ethical theories, ability to apply moral frameworks to case studies, and capacity to critically analyze moral dilemmas with empathy and perspective-taking. Instructions: answer all questions in the provided answer booklet. For multiple choice and short answer questions, provide clear and concise responses. For essay questions, structure your response with an introduction, analysis using relevant ethical frameworks, and a conclusion. Incorporate the principle of universality where applicable. Cite relevant thinkers, theories, or case studies from the course to support your arguments. Manage your time effectively. Allocate approximately 30 minutes for Part A, 30 minutes for Part B, and 60 minutes for Part C. Part A, multiple choice questions 20 points, 10 questions, 2 points each. Objective: test foundational knowledge of ethical concepts and theories. The principle of universality, as discussed by Noam Chomsky, implies that moral rules apply only to specific cultures. B. If an action is right for one person, it must be right for everyone in similar circumstances. C. Moral judgments are always subjective. D. Only consequences determine the morality of an action. Answer: B. Which ethical theory emphasizes the character of the moral agent over the action's consequences or rules? A. Consequentialism. B. Deontology. C. Virtue ethics. D. Moral relativism. Answer: C. According to utilitarianism, the most ethical choice is the one that follows universal moral laws. B. Produces the greatest good for the greatest number. C. Reflects the virtues of the individual. D. Aligns with cultural norms. Answer: B. Kant's categorical imperative is central to which ethical framework of virtue ethics? B. Consequentialism. C. Deontology. D. Moral realism. Answer: C. Which theory of justice focuses on the fairness of processes used to make decisions? A. Distributive justice. B. Retributive justice. C. Procedural justice. D. Restorative justice. Answer: C. In the context of civil disobedience, what is a key condition for it to be ethically justified? A. It must always be violent to attract attention. B. All legal avenues for change must be exhausted. C. It must prioritize personal gain. D. It requires no acceptance of legal consequences. Answer: B. The foreign language effect in moral decision-making suggests that moral judgments in a native language are always more emotional. B. Using a foreign language may lead to more utilitarian judgments. C. Language has no impact on moral reasoning. D. Moral judgments are always consistent across languages. Answer: B. In the case study on Medicure Pharmaceuticals, the company's use of passive voice and jargon was criticized for A. Enhancing transparency. B. Deflecting accountability. C. Promoting empathy. D. Clarifying moral responsibility. Answer: B. Which brain region is critical for integrating emotion into moral decision-making? According to the science of morality, A. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. D. LPFC. B. Ventromedial prefrontal cortex. VMPFC. C. Amygdala. D. Salience network. Answer: B. In the context of linguistic morality, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests that a language has no influence on moral thought. B. Language shapes how we perceive and frame moral issues. C. Moral judgments are universal across all languages. D. Only emotional language affects moral decisions. Answer: B. Part B, short answer questions 30 points, 5 questions, 6 points each. Objective: assess ability to apply ethical concepts to specific scenarios and demonstrate critical thinking. Define the principle of universality and explain how it applies to moral reasoning. Provide an example from the course case studies to illustrate its application. Sample answer: the principle of universality, as articulated by Noam Chomsky, states that if an action is right or wrong for one person, it must be right or wrong for everyone in similar circumstances, ensuring consistency and impartiality. In the Borrowed Ideas and Plagiarism Outcry case, Mark's condemnation of plagiarism as a moral stain implies a universal standard that he himself must uphold. His failure to acknowledge his own past plagiarism violates this principle, as he applies a stricter standard to others than to himself, undermining his moral credibility. Compare and contrast consequentialism and deontology using the whistleblower's promise case study. How would each framework guide Dr. Anya Sharma's decision? Sample answer: consequentialism, particularly utilitarianism, would guide Dr. Sharma to weigh the outcomes of disclosing the drug's side effects versus maintaining confidentiality. A utilitarian might prioritize public safety, potentially saving lives by disclosing, despite career damage. Deontology, following Kant's categorical imperative, would focus on her duties, such as truth-telling or keeping promises. A deontologist might argue that breaking confidentiality to protect lives is a universalizable duty, overriding her promise to her mentor, as lying undermines trust. Explain how virtue ethics differs from other ethical theories and apply it to the ambitious architect case study. What virtues should Liam prioritize? Sample answer: virtue ethics focuses on the moral agent's character and flourishing, unlike consequentialism outcomes or deontology rules. In Liam's case, virtues like honesty, integrity, and responsibility are key. A virtuous architect would prioritize transparency with the city council about the innovative material's cost, avoiding deceptive cost-cutting, to uphold professional excellence and public trust, even if it risks the project's scope or his reputation. How does the concept of procedural justice apply to the university admissions process? Case study suggest one improvement to enhance fairness. Sample answer: procedural justice emphasizes fair, transparent, and consistent decision-making processes. In the elite university case, the opaque admissions criteria and rumored favoritism violate procedural justice by lacking transparency and impartiality. An improvement would be publishing clear, weighted criteria for admissions decisions, ensuring applicants understand how decisions are made, thus enhancing perceived fairness. Using the dehumanizing rhetoric case study, explain how language can shape moral perceptions and behavior. Provide an example from the scenario. Sample answer: language shapes moral perceptions by framing groups in ways that influence attitudes and actions. In the dehumanizing rhetoric case, terms like invasion and swarm dehumanize immigrants, fostering fear and justifying discrimination. This rhetoric normalizes harassment, as seen in increased verbal assaults using these terms, illustrating how language can morally desensitize and incite harmful behavior. Part C, Essay questions 50 points, 2 questions, 25 points each. Objective: evaluate ability to synthesize course material, apply ethical frameworks comprehensively, and demonstrate empathetic reasoning in complex dilemmas. The lifeboat dilemma and ethical decision-making. 25 points. Using the lifeboat dilemma case study, analyze the scenario through the lenses of consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics. Which framework provides the most defensible solution, and why? Incorporate the principle of universality and consider the role of empathy in your analysis. Support your argument with references to course thinkers e.g. Bentham, Kant, Aristotle, and the science of morality. Sample answer outline. Introduction: briefly summarize the lifeboat dilemma and the ethical challenge of choosing who to sacrifice. Introduce the 3 ethical frameworks and the principle of universality. Consequentialism. Utilitarianism: a utilitarian, like Bentham or Mill, would aim to maximize overall good, likely sacrificing 2 individuals to save 10, possibly prioritizing those with greater social utility, e.g. cancer researcher. The science of morality suggests the J.O.L.L.F would drive this rational calculation, but emotional biases VMPFC, amygdala might complicate it. Deontology: Kant's categorical imperative would reject sacrificing anyone as a means to an end, as it violates human dignity. A universal rule like never sacrifice a life might be unworkable, leading to a contradiction, suggesting a duty to prioritize the majority's survival. Virtue ethics: Aristotle's focus on virtues like courage and justice would emphasize the captain's character in making a tragic but fair decision, possibly using a lottery to avoid bias, reflecting fairness and empathy. Principle of universality: if sacrificing 2 is right for the captain, it must be right for anyone in similar circumstances, ensuring impartiality. Empathy and perspective taking: consider the emotional impact on survivors and families, using empathy to balance rational choice with human dignity. Conclusion: argue that virtue ethics, with its focus on character and fairness, provides the most defensible solution by balancing empathy and impartiality, avoiding utilitarianism's cold calculus and deontology's rigidity. Civil disobedience and linguistic framing in the pipeline protest. 25 points using the pipeline protest case study. Evaluate the ethical justification for the protesters' civil disobedience. How does the language used by both the protesters and their opponents, e.g. government, corporations, shape the moral debate? Apply at least two ethical frameworks, e.g. consequentialism, deontology, virtue ethics, and the principle of universality to analyze the scenario. Discuss how empathy and perspective taking could influence the resolution of this conflict. Sample answer outline. Introduction. Summarize the pipeline protest and the role of civil disobedience in challenging unjust laws. Highlight the importance of language in shaping moral perceptions. Ethical justification. The protesters meet civil disobedience criteria: unjust law, exhausted legal avenues, nonviolence, accepting consequences, as per Gandhi and King. Consequentialism. A utilitarian would weigh the outcomes of the protest, e.g. environmental protection, indigenous rights against harms, e.g. economic disruption. The greatest good might favor stopping the pipeline if environmental damage is severe. Deontology. Kant would assess whether the protesters' actions align with universal duties, such as protecting human rights and the environment, over obeying an unjust law. Linguistic framing. Protesters' use of terms like ancestral rights and environmental stewardship frames their actions as morally imperative, while the corporation's economic development rhetoric prioritizes utility, influencing public perception per the Medicure case's linguistic insights. Principle of universality. If protesting an unjust law is right for the indigenous community, it must be right for others facing similar injustices. Empathy and perspective taking. Understanding the indigenous community's cultural and environmental stakes versus the corporation's economic priorities could foster dialogue, potentially leading to a compromise like stricter environmental regulations. Conclusion. The protest is ethically justified, with deontology providing a strong basis for prioritizing universal rights. Language shapes the moral debate significantly, and empathy could bridge divides for a fairer resolution. Final paper example for J.O.L.A.L.F Introductory Morality Course. Title: Navigating Algorithmic Bias in Predictive Policing, an Ethical Analysis Through Consequentialism, Deontology, and Virtue Ethics. Length: 2,500 to 3,000 words. Objective: to demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of ethical theories, apply them to a contemporary moral issue, integrate the principle of universality, and employ empathetic reasoning to propose a practical ethical solution. Assignment instructions. Choose one case study from Module 4 Applied Ethics and Contemporary Challenges. Analyze the ethical dilemma using at least two ethical frameworks: consequentialism, deontology, virtue ethics, and the principle of universality. Incorporate insights from the course, including the role of language in shaping moral perceptions, the science of morality, and the relationship between morality and justice. Propose a practical ethical decision-making framework to address the issue, emphasizing empathy and perspective taking. Use at least 5 course references, e.g. thinkers, case studies, theories, and structure the paper with an introduction, analysis, proposed solution, and conclusion. Format: double-spaced, 12-point font, APA citation style. Sample final paper: Algorithmic Bias in Predictive Policing. Introduction. In the digital age, the integration of artificial intelligence (AI) into societal systems like predictive policing, as exemplified in the Algorithmic Bias in Predictive Policing case study, presents profound ethical challenges. Metropolis's use of Sentinel Guard, an AI system designed to optimize police patrols, has reduced overall crime but disproportionately targets minority communities, raising questions of fairness, privacy, and corporate responsibility. This paper analyzes the ethical implications of Sentinel Guard's deployment through consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics, incorporating Noam Chomsky's principle of universality. It further explores how language shapes moral perceptions, draws on the science of morality to understand decision-making, and proposes a practical ethical framework to address algorithmic bias, emphasizing empathy and perspective-taking. Ethical analysis. Consequentialism. Utilitarianism, as articulated by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, evaluates actions based on their outcomes, aiming to maximize the greatest good for the greatest number. Module 2. In the Sentinel Guard case, a utilitarian would weigh the benefit of reduced crime rates and faster police response times against the harm of over-policing minority communities. The measurable decrease in crime suggests a net positive for Metropolis's overall safety. However, the increased arrests and strained community relations in targeted neighborhoods create significant harm, perpetuating a feedback loop of bias, as historical crime data reinforces the algorithm's predictions. Case study, Algorithmic Bias. The science of morality highlights that utilitarian decisions engage the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex DLPFC for rational calculation. Module 4, but emotional responses from affected communities, processed via the amygdala, may challenge this cold calculus. A utilitarian might conclude that the system needs recalibration to minimize harm to vulnerable groups while maintaining public safety, as the current disproportionate impact undermines long-term societal well-being. Deontology. Duty-based ethics. Immanuel Kant's deontological framework emphasizes actions that adhere to universal moral duties, such as treating individuals as ends, not means. Module 2. Sentinel Guard's reliance on historical data, which reflects societal biases, may violate duties of fairness and non-discrimination, as it treats minority communities as means to achieve crime reduction rather than respecting their dignity. The principle of universality demands that if over-policing is wrong for one group, it is wrong for all in similar circumstances. Chomsky. A deontologist would argue that Metropolis and Cognitech have a duty to ensure the algorithm does not perpetuate injustice, regardless of crime reduction outcomes. Kant's categorical imperative suggests a universal rule: only use AI systems that do not discriminate based on historical biases. The lack of transparency in Sentinel Guard's data and decision-making processes further violates procedural justice. Module 3, as affected communities cannot scrutinize or appeal the algorithm's decisions. Virtue ethics. Aristotle's virtue ethics focuses on cultivating character traits like justice, responsibility, and compassion to achieve eudaimonia. Module 2. Police Chief Davis and Cognitech's leadership must embody virtues that prioritize fairness and public trust. The golden mean in this context lies between neglecting technological advancements and blindly relying on biased AI. A virtuous leader would transparently address community concerns, courageously challenge Cognitech to revise the algorithm, and compassionately engage with over-policed communities to restore trust. Case study, Algorithmic Bias. The science of morality suggests that empathy, linked to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex VMPFC, is crucial for understanding the emotional impact on targeted communities, aligning with virtue ethics' emphasis on character-driven decisions. Linguistic influence on moral perceptions. The case study on Medicure Pharmaceuticals illustrates how language shapes moral responsibility. Module 4. Cognitech's claim that Sentinel Guard is objective and reflects existing societal patterns uses neutral, technical language to deflect accountability, similar to Medicure's passive voice tactics. Conversely, Community groups emotionally charged terms like over-policing and injustice frame the issue as a moral failing, rallying public support case study, dehumanizing rhetoric. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests that such linguistic framing influences how stakeholders perceive the ethical stakes, with Cognitech's jargon potentially desensitizing the public to the human cost of algorithmic bias. Module 4. Proposed ethical decision-making framework to address Sentinel-Guard's biases. Metropolis and Cognitech should adopt a multi-step ethical framework, transparency and accountability, publish clear documentation of Sentinel-Guard's data sources and decision-making criteria, aligning with procedural justice principles. Module 3. This allows communities to scrutinize and challenge the system. Bias mitigation. Engage independent auditors to identify and correct biases in historical data, incorporating community input to ensure fairness. This reflects the principle of universality, ensuring equal treatment across groups. Empathy and perspective taking. Conduct public forums to hear from affected communities, fostering understanding of their experiences, as empathy is critical for virtuous leadership. Module 4. Continuous monitoring. Implement regular evaluations of Sentinel-Guard's impact on all neighborhoods, using metrics beyond crime reduction, such as community trust and arrest disparities. Corporate responsibility. Cognitech must accept ethical responsibility for the social impact of its AI, revising algorithms to prioritize fairness over mere efficiency, aligning with deontological duties. Module 4. This framework balances utilitarian goals of public safety with deontological duties of fairness and virtuous leadership's emphasis on empathy, ensuring a just and inclusive approach. Conclusion. The Sentinel-Guard case underscores the complex interplay of technology, morality, and justice in the digital age. Utilitarianism highlights the need to balance crime reduction with community harm. Deontology demands adherence to universal fairness, and virtue ethics calls for compassionate leadership. The principle of universality ensures consistent application of ethical standards, while linguistic framing shapes public moral perceptions. By adopting a transparent, empathetic, and bias-mitigating framework, Metropolis and Cognitech can navigate this dilemma ethically, fostering a safer and more just society. This analysis reflects the course's core insight: morality is a dynamic, empathetic endeavor requiring continuous reflection to align actions with principles in an evolving world. References: Bentham, J. 1789. An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation. Kant, I. 1785. Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. Aristotle. 350 BCE. Nicomachean Ethics. Chomsky, N. Course Material. Principle of Universality. Course Syllabus, Modules 2, 3, 4. Consequentialism, Deontology, Virtue Ethics, Justice, Applied Ethics. Case Studies, Algorithmic Bias in Predictive Policing, Medicure Pharmaceuticals, Dehumanizing Rhetoric. Notes on Design. Final Exam. The exam tests knowledge Part A, application Part B, and synthesis Part C, aligning with the course's learning objectives. It incorporates case studies, ethical theories, linguistic insights, and the science of morality to ensure comprehensive assessment. Final paper. The paper requires students to engage deeply with a contemporary issue, apply multiple ethical lenses, and propose a practical solution, reflecting the course's emphasis on real-world application, empathy, and universality. The sample paper uses the algorithmic bias case to demonstrate how to weave together course themes. Both assessments encourage critical thinking, empathy, and the application of the principle of universality, ensuring students leave the course with a robust ethical framework for personal and professional life. Appendix A, Moral Psychology and Moral Determinism. This appendix provides an overview of moral psychology and moral determinism, two critical areas that intersect with the J.O.L.A.L.F. Introductory Morality Course's exploration of ethical theories, the science of morality, and the nature of moral decision-making. These topics deepen students' understanding of how psychological processes shape moral judgments and whether free will or deterministic factors govern moral behavior. The content draws on course materials, particularly the science of morality, case studies, and philosophical inquiries, while maintaining a concise and accessible format for undergraduate learners. Moral psychology. Definition and scope. Moral psychology is an interdisciplinary field that examines the cognitive, emotional, and social processes underlying moral judgments, emotions, and behaviors. It integrates insights from psychology, neuroscience, evolutionary biology, and philosophy to understand how humans form moral beliefs, make ethical decisions, and act on them. Unlike normative ethics, which prescribes how people should act, moral psychology focuses on the descriptive question of how people do act morally, exploring the mechanisms behind moral reasoning, intuition, and motivation. Key concepts and findings. Dual process theory. Moral psychology often employs a dual process model, distinguishing between fast, intuitive, emotion-driven judgments system 1 and slower, deliberate, reason-based judgments system 2. For example, in the lifeboat dilemma case study, an emotional aversion to sacrificing lives linked to the amygdala and ventromedial prefrontal cortex (VMPFC) may conflict with a utilitarian calculation to save the most people driven by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex (DLPFC). This interplay is evident in Joshua Green's research, which shows that emotional responses dominate in personal moral dilemmas, e.g. pushing someone off a bridge to save others, while rational calculations prevail in impersonal ones, e.g. flipping a switch. Neural correlates of morality. Functional neuroimaging fMRI, EEG reveals that moral decision-making involves a network of brain regions. Ventromedial prefrontal cortex (VMPFC) integrates emotions into moral judgments, critical for empathy and social value assessment. Damage to the VMPFC, as seen in patients with frontotemporal dementia, can lead to cold, utilitarian decisions or impaired moral sensitivity. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex (DLPFC) supports cognitive control, abstract reasoning, and adherence to social norms, enabling deliberate moral calculations. Amygdala processes emotional stimuli like fear or disgust, often driving intuitive moral reactions, e.g. recoiling from harm in the whistleblower's promise case. Salience network detects morally relevant situations, prioritizing attention to ethical dilemmas. These findings, highlighted in Module 4's Science of Morality, underscore that moral judgments are not purely rational but emerge from an interplay of emotion and cognition. Evolutionary roots. Moral psychology draws on evolutionary psychology to argue that moral capacities evolved to enhance group survival. Pro-social behaviors like empathy, altruism, and fairness detection seen in infants and some animals provided adaptive advantages, as discussed in Module 1. For instance, reciprocal altruism and kin selection explain why humans prioritize cooperation, as modeled in game theory simulations. This perspective suggests that moral intuitions, such as aversion to harm or cheating, are hardwired but shaped by cultural norms, as seen in the pipeline protest case, where indigenous values of environmental stewardship reflect evolved communal instincts. Linguistic influences. The course's focus on linguistic morality Module 4 aligns with moral psychology's exploration of how language shapes moral perceptions. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests that linguistic structures influence ethical framing, as seen in the dehumanizing rhetoric case, where terms like invasion evoke fear-driven moral judgments. The foreign language effect further shows that moral decisions in a non-native language are more utilitarian, likely due to reduced emotional engagement, impacting cases like Medicare Pharmaceuticals crisis communication. Empathy and perspective taking. Moral psychology emphasizes empathy as a driver of moral behavior, mediated by the VMPFC and theory of mind, the ability to understand others' mental states. The course's case studies, such as algorithmic bias in predictive policing, highlight how empathizing with over-policed communities can shift moral priorities toward fairness. Perspective taking fosters nuanced ethical reasoning, balancing self-interest with communal well-being. Relevance to the course. Moral psychology enriches the course by providing empirical insights into how ethical theories are applied in practice. For example, consequentialism, utilitarian decisions align with DLPFC-driven calculations of outcomes, but emotional biases, amygdala, VMPFC, can skew perceptions of greatest good, as in the lifeboat dilemma. Deontology, Kantian duties rely on rational consistency, DLPFC, but intuitive aversions to breaking promises, e.g. whistleblower's promise, complicate adherence to universal rules. Virtue ethics, Aristotle's focus on character aligns with moral psychology's emphasis on habit formation and emotional regulation, as seen in the ambitious architect's pursuit of integrity. The science of morality also informs contemporary challenges. Module 4, such as programming moral heuristics into AI, e.g. autonomous vehicle dilemmas, where human biases must be quantified and modeled. Moral determinism. Definition and scope. Moral determinism is the philosophical view that all moral actions and judgments are fully determined by prior causes, such as biological, environmental, psychological, or social factors, leaving no room for free will in moral decision-making. It contrasts with libertarian free will, which posits that individuals have genuine freedom to choose their actions, and compatibilism, which argues that free will can coexist with determinism if actions align with one's desires. Moral determinism raises profound questions about moral responsibility, blame, and praise, central to the course's exploration of ethics and justice. Key concepts and arguments. Deterministic influences. Moral determinism posits that moral behavior is the inevitable result of causal chains, biological factors, genetic predispositions, and neural wiring shape moral intuitions. For example, the Science of Morality Module 4 shows that VMPFC damage can alter moral judgments, suggesting neurological determinism. Environmental factors, upbringing, culture, and socioeconomic conditions mold moral beliefs. The dehumanizing rhetoric case illustrates how media exposure to inflammatory language can deterministically influence discriminatory behavior. Psychological factors, cognitive biases and emotional states, as studied in moral psychology, constrain moral choices. The foreign language effect demonstrates how linguistic context can deterministically shift moral reasoning toward utilitarianism. Social factors, norms and peer influences shape moral actions, as seen in the pipeline protest, where collective indigenous values drive civil disobedience. Philosophical foundations, hard determinism. This view, associated with thinkers like Baruch Spinoza, asserts that free will is an illusion, and all moral actions are predetermined. If Dr. Anya Sharma's decision in the whistleblower's promise is fully caused by her upbringing, professional training, and emotional state, she cannot be said to have freely chosen to disclose or withhold information. Soft determinism. Compatibilism. Compatibilists like David Hume argue that moral responsibility is possible even if actions are determined, as long as individuals act according to their desires and reasoning. In the ambitious architect case, Liam's choice to prioritize integrity could be determined by his values yet still reflect a responsible character. Implications for moral responsibility. Hard determinism challenges traditional notions of blame and praise. If Mark's plagiarism in the borrowed ideas case was determined by his early career pressures, can he be held morally accountable? Compatibilism suggests he can, if his actions aligned with his reflective choices. Challenges to free will. Moral determinism draws on neuroscience and psychology to question free will. Libet's experiments 1980s showed that brain activity precedes conscious awareness of decisions, suggesting that choices may originate in unconscious processes. In the lifeboat dilemma, the captain's decision to sacrifice 2 lives might be driven by neural and emotional determinants rather than free choice, raising ethical questions about accountability in high-stakes scenarios. Critiques and counterarguments. Libertarian free will. Critics argue that moral determinism undermines human agency and the intuitive sense of choice. Kant's deontology, for instance, assumes rational agents can freely choose to follow the categorical imperative, as in the whistleblower's promise. Moral progress. If morality is fully determined, accounting for moral progress, e.g. abolition of slavery, becomes challenging, as it implies agency to challenge deterministic norms. Practical implications. Even if determinism is true, societies operate as if individuals have responsibility, as seen in Retributive Justice Module 3. The juvenile offender case assumes Alex can be held accountable, regardless of deterministic influences like youth or environment. Relevance to the course. Moral determinism intersects with the course's themes by challenging students to reconsider moral responsibility in light of causal influences, ethical theories. Determinism complicates consequentialism. Can outcomes be freely chosen? Deontology. Can duties be freely followed? And virtue ethics. Can virtues be freely cultivated? Justice. Theories of justice. Module 3 assume some degree of responsibility. Determinism questions whether punishment, retributive justice, or resource allocation, distributive justice, is fair if actions are predetermined. Case studies. In the algorithmic bias case, deterministic AI algorithms raise questions about whether biased outcomes are chosen or inevitable, paralleling human deterministic influences. The pipeline protest case explores whether protesters' actions are freely chosen or driven by cultural and environmental determinism. Principle of universality. Chomsky's principle assumes consistent moral standards, but determinism questions whether individuals can freely apply such standards or are bound by causal factors. Integration with moral psychology. Moral psychology and moral determinism are closely linked, as psychological research provides empirical support for deterministic views. The neural and evolutionary basis of moral judgment suggest that decisions are shaped by factors beyond conscious control. For example, the dual process theory shows that intuitive deterministic responses often override deliberate reasoning, as in the dehumanizing rhetoric case, where emotional language triggers predictable moral outrage. However, moral psychology also supports compatibilism by highlighting how a reflective reasoning system too can align with determined desires, enabling moral responsibility, as seen in the ambitious architect's deliberate choice to uphold integrity. Application to course case studies. Lifeboat dilemma. Moral psychology explains the captain's decision as a clash between emotional aversion (VMPFC), amygdala, and utilitarian reasoning (DLPFC). Determinism suggests the decision may be predetermined by neural and situational factors, challenging whether the captain is truly responsible for the outcome. Whistleblower's promise. Dr. Sharma's moral conflict reflects dual process theory, with emotional loyalty to her mentor VMPFC competing with rational duty to public safety DLPFC. Determinism questions whether her choice is free or shaped by her training and environment. Algorithmic bias in predictive policing. Moral psychology highlights how community perceptions of unfairness are emotionally driven amygdala, while deterministic algorithms mirror human deterministic biases, raising questions about accountability for both AI and human decisions. Dehumanizing rhetoric, linguistic framing exploits psychological determinism, as emotionally charged terms predictably shape moral judgments. Moral psychology's focus on empathy suggests countering such rhetoric with perspective-taking to mitigate deterministic influences. Practical implications for students. Understanding moral psychology and moral determinism equips J.O.L.A.L.F students with critical awareness, recognizing the emotional and cognitive biases that shape moral judgments, e.g. foreign language effect. Dual process theory enhances self-reflection in ethical decision-making. Empathetic reasoning, empathy, as studied in moral psychology, aligns with the course's emphasis on perspective-taking, enabling students to navigate diverse moral perspectives in cases like the pipeline protest. Philosophical inquiry, grappling with determinism challenges students to reconcile free will with responsibility, enriching their analysis of justice and accountability in Module 3 case studies. Real-world application, insights from moral psychology and determinism inform contemporary issues. Module 4, such as designing ethical AI systems that account for human biases or addressing the societal impact of deterministic media influences. Conclusion. Moral psychology and moral determinism offer complementary lenses for understanding the complexities of moral behavior. Moral psychology reveals the cognitive and emotional mechanisms behind ethical decisions, grounding the course's exploration of ethical theories and case studies in empirical science. Moral determinism challenges traditional notions of free will, prompting students to reconsider moral responsibility in light of biological, psychological, and social causes. Together, these fields enhance the J.O.L.A.L.F Introductory Morality course by bridging philosophy and science, encouraging students to critically analyze their moral frameworks and act with greater awareness and empathy in a deterministic world. By integrating these insights, students are better equipped to navigate the ethical dilemmas of personal and professional life, aligning their actions with the principle of universality and the pursuit of a just and humane society. Appendix B, Metaethics, Interactive Learning, and Capstone Integration. This appendix enhances the J.O.L.A.L.F Introductory Morality course by addressing metaethical foundations, incorporating innovative pedagogical strategies, and culminating in a capstone project. It builds on the course's strengths: comprehensive ethical frameworks, practical case studies, and interdisciplinary insights from moral psychology and linguistic morality while resolving identified gaps to ensure a transformative learning experience. The appendix aims to deepen philosophical inquiry, boost student engagement through interactive methods, and provide a synthesizing project that reinforces ethical reasoning, empathy, and the principle of universality. Section 1, Deepening Metaethical Inquiry. Purpose. The course briefly touches on metaethical questions, e.g. moral realism versus anti-realism in Module 1, but a more robust exploration would clarify the nature of moral truths and enhance students' ability to critically evaluate ethical theories. This section introduces a dedicated metaethics component to Module 1, ensuring students understand the foundations of moral judgments before applying normative frameworks. Content. Expanded Metaethical Framework, Moral Realism, explores the view that objective moral facts exist independently of human beliefs, as discussed in the course's philosophical overview. For example, in the lifeboat dilemma, a realist might argue that sacrificing 2 lives is objectively right or wrong based on universal principles, regardless of cultural norms. Key thinkers include G. E. Moore non-naturalism and Philippa Foot naturalism. Moral anti-realism covers emotivism A. J. Eyre, prescriptivism R. M. Hare, and error theory J. L. Mackey, emphasizing that moral judgments may reflect emotions, prescriptions, or cultural constructs. In the dehumanizing rhetoric case, Anti-realists might view terms like invasion as emotional triggers rather than objective moral claims. Moral relativism versus universality contrasts cultural relativism. Morality varies by culture with Chomsky's principle of universality, using the borrowed ideas case to debate whether plagiarism is universally wrong or context-dependent. The is-ought problem introduces David Hume's distinction between descriptive facts and prescriptive norms, linking to the science of morality Appendix A and the autonomous vehicle dilemma, where programming moral decisions bridges is and ought. Activities, debate. Students debate whether moral truths are objective realism or subjective anti-realism, using the whistleblower's promise case to argue whether Dr. Sharma's duty to disclose is universal or context-specific. Reflective journaling. Students write on what makes a moral statement true, applying metaethical perspectives to personal experiences or course case studies. Case study analysis. Apply metaethical lenses to the pipeline protest, evaluating whether indigenous rights are objectively valid realism or culturally relative anti-realism. Integration with course. This metaethical focus strengthens Module 1 by grounding ethical theories in philosophical questions about morality's nature. It connects to Module 2's normative frameworks, e.g. Kant's deontology assumes moral realism, and Module 4's contemporary challenges, e.g. AI ethics requires defining moral truths for algorithms. The principle of universality is reinforced by examining whether moral standards can be objectively consistent across contexts. Section 2, Enhancing Engagement through Interactive and Multimedia Learning. Purpose. The course relies heavily on readings and written assignments, which may not fully engage students with diverse learning preferences. This section introduces interactive and multimedia elements to boost engagement, particularly in Modules 3 and 4, while making complex topics like moral psychology and linguistic morality more accessible. Content. Interactive simulations, Virtual Moral Dilemma Simulator, an online tool where students navigate scenarios like the lifeboat dilemma or algorithmic bias, making real-time decisions and seeing immediate consequences. For example, in the lifeboat dilemma, students choose who to sacrifice and reflect on emotional versus rational drivers, linking to Appendix A's dual process theory. Civil disobedience role play. In Module 3, students simulate the pipeline protest, with groups representing indigenous activists, corporate executives, and government officials. They negotiate, debate, and reflect on empathy and perspective-taking, reinforcing the ethics of civil disobedience. Multimedia resources, video case studies, short documentaries or dramatizations of course cases, e.g., a reenactment of the whistleblower's promise or a news segment on dehumanizing rhetoric to visualize ethical dilemmas and linguistic framing. Neuroscience animations, animated videos explaining moral psychology concepts, e.g. VMPFC's role in empathy, DLPFC's role in utilitarianism from Appendix A, using the autonomous vehicle dilemma to illustrate neural processes. Podcasts, guest lectures or discussions with ethicists, psychologists, or activists, e.g. on AI bias or global supply chain ethics to contextualize Module 4's contemporary issues. Group activities, linguistic framing workshop. In Module 4, students analyze media clips from the dehumanizing rhetoric case, rewriting inflammatory terms, e.g. invasion to migration, to assess how language shifts moral perceptions, linking to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Ethics hackathon, students collaborate in teams to propose solutions to Module 4 cases, e.g. redesigning Sentinel Guard's algorithm to reduce bias, presenting their frameworks to peers. Integration with course. These elements enhance engagement by catering to visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners, making abstract concepts tangible. Simulations and role plays deepen empathy, aligning with the course's emphasis on perspective taking, while multimedia resources clarify complex topics like moral psychology and determinism. Appendix A. Group activities foster peer learning, complementing individual assignments like the final paper. Section 3, Extending Module 4 for contemporary challenges. Purpose: the 10-week course feels slightly condensed, particularly for Module 4's exploration of applied ethics. Extending Module 4 allows deeper engagement with contemporary issues and Appendix A's interdisciplinary insights, ensuring students can fully apply ethical frameworks to real-world complexities. Content. Extended timeline: Module 4 is expanded from 2 weeks to 3 weeks, creating an 11-week course. The additional week focuses on synthesizing interdisciplinary insights and applying them to case studies. Week 9 introduces contemporary challenges: AI, misinformation, globalization with multimedia resources and simulations. Week 10 deepens case study analysis, e.g. algorithmic bias, global garment factory, social media echo chamber using moral psychology, linguistic morality, and meta-ethics. Week 11 focuses on developing practical ethical frameworks, integrating Appendix A's neural and deterministic insights, and preparing for the capstone project. New case study: Climate change and corporate accountability. Students analyze a multinational corporation's decision to invest in green technology versus maintaining fossil fuel operations, weighing utilitarian outcomes, global emissions versus jobs, deontological duties, environmental stewardship, and virtues, responsibility, courage. The case incorporates linguistic framing, e.g. sustainability vs. economic growth, and moral psychology, e.g. empathy for future generations, linking to Appendix A's evolutionary perspective on communal survival. Activities: Policy proposal: students draft a policy to address one Module 4 case, e.g. regulating social media misinformation, incorporating ethical theories, universality, and psychological insights. Guest speaker session: an ethicist or technologist discusses real-world applications of course concepts, such as programming ethical AI, followed by a Q&A integration with course. The extended Module 4 ensures students have ample time to grapple with complex issues like AI bias and climate ethics, applying the full spectrum of course tools: ethical theories, universality, moral psychology, and linguistic morality. The new case study reinforces relevance to global challenges, while activities prepare students for the capstone project. Section 4, Capstone Project. Purpose: the course lacks a culminating experience that allows students to publicly demonstrate their ethical frameworks. A capstone project synthesizes learning, reinforces critical thinking, and prepares students to apply their skills beyond the classroom, addressing the previous suggestion for a public articulation of learning. Content. Project overview. Title: Designing an Ethical Future. Objective: students create a comprehensive ethical framework to address a self-selected moral issue from course case studies or personal interest, integrating at least 2 ethical theories: the principle of universality, empathy, and interdisciplinary insights, moral psychology, linguistic morality, meta-ethics. Format: a 10-minute presentation in class or recorded and a 1,000-word written reflection. Examples: proposing a bias mitigation strategy for Sentinel Guard algorithmic bias case, using utilitarianism, deontology, and moral psychology's empathy insights. Developing a corporate social responsibility policy for ethical threads, global garment factory case, incorporating virtue ethics, universality, and linguistic framing. Addressing health misinformation on Connectify social media case, using meta-ethical realism to justify truth as an objective value. Components: research: students analyze their chosen issue, drawing on course readings, case studies, and external sources e.g. ethical AI guidelines, environmental policies. Framework development. Create a practical decision-making framework, specifying actions, stakeholders, and ethical justifications. Presentation. Deliver a clear, persuasive presentation to peers, simulating a professional or public policy setting, followed by a Q&A to defend their framework. Reflection. Write a reflection on how the project shaped their ethical perspective, addressing challenges, empathy, and personal growth. Assessment criteria, depth of ethical analysis, use of theories, universality, meta-ethics. Integration of interdisciplinary insights, moral psychology, linguistic morality. Clarity and feasibility of the proposed framework, empathy and perspective taking in addressing stakeholders. Presentation and reflection quality. Integration with course. The capstone project ties together all modules. Module 1's meta-ethical foundations inform the nature of moral claims, Module 2's theories guide framework development, Module 3's justice concepts ensure fairness, and Module 4's contemporary issues provide real-world contexts. It reinforces Appendix A's moral psychology, e.g. empathy's neural basis, and Appendix B's meta-ethical and interactive elements, culminating in a public demonstration of the course's core goal, cultivating a robust ethical framework.
More I run through fields of gray, chasing dreams that wouldn't stay. Our hearts so wild it couldn't yield, lost in the fight yet never healed. More, don't fade away. Hold your ground, come what may. Through the storm, through the ache. Morale, it's yours to take. The skies were dark, the winds did howl. The mora's fire, it burned so foul. Against the tide, against the fall, a spirit bold above it all. Morale, don't fade away. Hold your ground, come what may. Through the storm, through the ache. Morale, it's yours to take. When shadows whisper lies to you, remember light cuts through the blue. The strength you hold, it's in your hands. Morale, make your stand. Morale.